If there's one actor who clearly beat Hollywood, it's Jim Carrey, and he exposed all the people within it. In his very first film, he propelled himself to fame, soon becoming one of the world's most beloved actors. Whether it's his mastery of physical comedy or his electric presence, there's no question that Jim Carrey's got that special something.
I wanted to find the most meaningless thing that I could come to and join.
But despite his long list of hits, Jim Carrey never really fit into the rest of Hollywood. He certainly got his enemies in the industry, from other actors who took offense to his no-holds-barred personality, to producers looking to control his artistic expression. It explains why, despite his massive success as a comedic and dramatic actor, he's been completely snubbed by the big award shows. But even beyond that, it's clear to anyone who's ever seen him interviewed that Jim Carrey is completely beyond the performative dishonesty at the heart of Hollywood, and he makes fun of all the people playing along with it. So let's explore how his unflinching honesty and unwillingness to play along with the lie has exposed Hollywood and its celebrities for what they really are. Like most of the good actors in Hollywood, Jim Carrey came from pretty much nothing. Born in Ontario, Canada, Jim had a modest upbringing living with his parents on the outskirts of Toronto. His family weren't rich by any means, in fact they could barely scrape by. His father, who at his heart was an entertainer, had been forced to give up his craft to support his family. While he never lost his energetic spark, it did leave him stranded for years in a dead-end accounting job. Meanwhile, his mother was often unwell, something which he would often open up about in interviews later on in his life. My mum was addicted to pain medication. She was very sick in a lot of ways. She was lovely too, but she was a child of alcoholics and she had issues. And that's not intentional abandonment. She was always there for me. She was always there in the house. But if you're high on painkillers, that's abandonment. It was these two influences that pushed him towards comedy and performance from a very early age. Both to emulate the good traits of his father and to try and make his mother feel just a little bit better, he would spend hours practicing his comedy, nailing his facial expressions and his impressions of other people. By the age of 10, he had over 100 of them stored up in the bank, all of which had been painstakingly crafted to be as accurate as possible. He would spend his teenage years perfecting them even further, but life got in the way all too often. By the time he was 16, Jim Carrey's father had lost his job, and it pushed his family off the brink of poverty. Eventually, they were forced to leave town, surviving by living in a small camper van on a relative's lawn.
I mean, because people know you live in a car.
Actually, we would go around to, one time for a while, we pitched a tent on my sister's lawn in the country. And then for a while we went to campsites around, Ontario. Right. We had more fun there than we did when we were doing this job that we didn't like.
The janitor job.
Yeah, the janitor job.
Jim left school shortly afterwards, having to work a crummy menial job just to make sure his family had enough to eat. But even at this low point in his early life, he still found the time to work on making people laugh. It was in his late teens that he began performing at stand-up comedy nights, something he was almost immediately successful at. At first, Jim was understandably focused on his impressions. They did the job of making people laugh after all, and he was already one of the best in the business. Even at this point, Jim Carrey's career was proof that if you really want something, you have to work harder than everyone else. But as his career started to open up and he started gaining traction, Jim threw nearly all of it out and started creating his own irreverent, unpredictable material. Often it didn't work quite as well. Audiences that would have enjoyed all of his earlier work were suddenly on a knife's edge. You never knew whether his next joke would bring everyone to tears or completely flop. He had a talent for putting everything on the line, using his expressions in such a way that you could tell he wasn't holding back anything. This courageous vulnerability was going to be the key to his success, as we could see in later years. From his father's experiences, he knew that stagnation, settling for something, doesn't always mean safety.
My father could have been a great comedian, but he didn't believe that that was possible for him. And so he made a conservative choice. Instead, he got a safe job as an accountant. And when I was 12 years old, he was let go from that safe job. And our family had to do whatever we could to survive. I learned many great lessons from my father, not the least of which was that you can fail at what you don't want. So you might as well take a chance on doing what you love.
He had given up on his dream of being an entertainer in exchange for the well-being of his family, but eventually he lost that job anyway when the higher-ups decided that they didn't need him anymore. Jim wanted his father's sacrifice to mean something, and for that to happen, he needed to take everything that he possibly could from the world. It was this ambition that eventually brought him to Hollywood, where his mastery of physical comedy and his presence on stage could really get put to work. His first forays into TV and films were still closely tied to comedy. His first hit show in Living Color was still a sketch comedy show, but it let Jim Carrey shine. It was also around this time that he began working on writing his first comedy film, Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. Just like his stand-up sets, it was going to be anything but the usual slop. Instead of going along with the tropes of the time and playing into Hollywood's standard procedure, he was going to attack it. Quote, "My plan was not to join Hollywood, it was to destroy it. Take a gigantic sledgehammer to the leading man into all the seriousness." And it makes it all the more impressive that this could have been Jim Carrey's only shot at making it big in cinema. If it flopped, his other projects might have been cancelled, and it would have gone down in history as just another forgettable 90s comedy movie. At first, it even seemed like this was the film's destiny. At test screenings, most critics hated the film. Under half gave it a positive review. Roger Ebert called it a long and funny slog. The New York Times said that only a child would have enjoyed Jim Carrey's performance. They couldn't have been more wrong. Released in early 1994, the film pulled in nearly 10 times its budget at the domestic and international box offices, all whilst making Jim Carrey a household name overnight. In the end, it was just another example of how far off base critics can really be. They're a part of the Hollywood establishment, so just like the rest of their colleagues in the industry, they have no real idea about Jim Carrey's appeal. But to their credit, the film executives knew they'd found a winner. Hollywood might have not been able to understand his appeal, but they definitely understood the money he could make them. Jim Carrey had been set to appear in 2 other films in the same year, The Mask and Dumber and Dumber. How much he got paid for them and whether the studios bothered to promote them was still up in the air. That was until Ace Ventura. You see, once they saw his potential, Carrey was able to negotiate 10 times the salary for his next films. It also gave him 3 starring roles in a single year, enough to catapult him straight to the top. The Mask made over $350 million when it came out that summer. Dumb and Dumber made another $270 million that Christmas. Anything he touched turned to gold. The next year brought 2 more films for Jim Carrey, both of them hits with the audiences and snubbed by the critics. Ace Ventura's sequel made nearly double the previous film, whilst Carrey's appearance as the Riddler in Batman Forever was enough to hold together a more lighthearted take on the franchise. It solidified Jim Carrey's position at the top of the A-list. He was a superstar around the world. In his next film, The Cable Guy, Jim Carrey was paid nearly $20 million, making him the highest paid actor in Hollywood at the time. This came along with 15% of the profits as well. At this point, for Jim Carrey to even consider a role, you had to pay top dollar. Up until this point, Carrey had been seen as a strictly comedic actor, working in light roles which worked with a signature overconfident personality. Most other actors would have kept this going for decades. If it isn't broken, don't fix it. But yet again, Jim Carrey wasn't going to take the safe option. The Cable Guy, which came out in 1996, was the first time he stepped away from that. It had a much darker tone mixed in with the eccentricity, adding a creepy and unsettling vibe to his performance. Some critics loved it, others hated it, but nonetheless, it showed that Jim Carrey could succeed at more than just comedy, and it was the first time he was able to step away from his carefully crafted persona. It was a move that would set up some of his next big films, like The Truman Show, something that we've spoken a bunch about on this channel. It's an amazing film, centered around a man living in a world where he's unknowingly the main character in a giant TV show. It's a huge allegory for modern society. His world is a giant movie set and everyone knows he's playing a role. In that film, he masterfully plays someone going through the process of realizing his whole life is a lie. It's easy to see how we could have given so much authenticity and power to the role of Truman, because around the same time, Jim Carrey was becoming Truman himself. He didn't know who he was, stuck in a world treating him like a god, and yet it all somehow felt so fake. This was something he later expanded upon in this interview.
Are you more comfortable as one or the other, or is that like, are they even mutually exclusive?
I don't exist. So they're all characters that I played, including Jim Carrey, including Joel Barish, including any of those things. They're all characters.
Jim Carrey had crafted this professional persona. It was something he thought would work, and it did spectacularly. But once he'd achieved his goals, found his dream, and made it big, what else was there? He'd done everything he set out to achieve, and he could have continued playing this character for the rest of his life, being a puppet for the Hollywood industry and making untold millions from it. But after a certain point, there wasn't any real reason to. In a lot of ways, it was tiring as well. It was a character designed to take as much of the load of the audience's back as possible. Someone so much larger than life. The people could enjoy how little he worried about everything else that gets in the way and forget about their own problems. Then there was the character that Hollywood demanded of him. All the networking, cozying up to executives and securing new roles. It was all just feeling so meaningless now. There wasn't any reason for him to keep playing the part in that fake world anymore. It didn't matter anymore. The offers and roles piled up, but Jim Carrey could take his pick of the films that he thought were actually worth something. He still took the opportunity to slip back into comedy from time to time, but this period of his career gave us some of his best dramatic performances. One of these films was Man on the Moon, a biographical movie about the life of Andy Kaufman, an influential alternative comedian who passed away at the young age of 35. Even though the film was generally a success, it was Carrey's true-to-life performance which kept the film together. Jim Carrey had achieved this through months of hard work. By method acting, he had stayed in character as Andy the entire time he was working on the movie, and the results show how effective this turned out to be. It's something that's only possible when you throw yourself completely into a role, without caring about how the rest of the business is going to see you. Of course, there should be limits. When Jared Leto was set to be the latest actor to play the Joker in the 2016 Suicide Squad, he went way too far. His co-stars have since told interviewers that he sent them things like dead animals in the mail.
I got so many weird things. I can't even begin to tell you the weird things I got.
Yeah, he said
100% use condoms and sticky Playboy magazines and the dead pig.
It clearly didn't help his performance. The poor writing and directing had already stunted the film anyway. But Jim Carrey never went that far. From the information that's out there, it seems like he never did anything to actually inconvenience or mess with his fellow colleagues on the set of Man on the Moon. The director of the movie had nothing but good words for his performance, but it didn't stop other A-listers from taking offense to his dedication to the craft. Martin Freeman from The Office, Black Panther and The Hobbit starred alongside Carrey in the film.
And I'm genuinely sure Jim Carrey is a lovely and smart person, but it was the most self-aggrandizing, selfish, narcissistic bollocks I've ever seen. And the idea that anything in our culture would celebrate that or support it is deranged. I mean, it's literally deranged.
He then went on to say,
get the job done, man. Do your work, you know.
He should have got fired.
He should totally have got fired. And can you imagine if he had been anybody else under the line? I mean, he would have been sectioned, never, let alone fired. He would have been got rid of. It's the ridiculous leeway that is given to some people.
Freeman never went into specifics, of course, but it's clear that Jim Carrey had rubbed him off the wrong way. It wasn't the first time something like this has happened. Tommy Lee Jones had similar things to say about Jim Carrey, but this time it wasn't to do with his acting style. After playing well alongside him in Batman Forever, according to Jim Carrey, he actually hated his guts. It's a story he actually told the late Norm Macdonald in this interview.
I was at a restaurant and you know, the mentor D said, "Oh, Tommy, I hear you're working with Tommy Lee Jones. He's over in the corner having dinner." And I went over and I said, "Hey, Tommy, how you doing?" Like that, and the blood just drained from his face, like he had been thinking about me 24 hours.
You'd already done the movie.
And he started shaking, and he got up and he went like this, and he went like to hug me, and he said, "I hate you. I really don't like you." Like that.
You couldn't have guessed that this was going on behind the scenes, especially considering that Tom Lee Jones was easily matching Jim Carrey in every scene they shared in the film. But these are just two of the actors that have disagreements with Jim Carrey. You can imagine there's many more, and it's likely because it's got a lot to do with how good he is at taking the spotlight in anything he does. It's really hard to outdo him in any scene, so it makes sense that A-listers would get angry over not being the center of attention anymore, especially when they have always been the center of attention their entire life. These incidences and others like them could have played a role in Jim Carrey distancing himself from Hollywood later on in his career. Fast forward to today, and he's been on his own spiritual journey, far removed from that world of fast cars and false smiles. And this has allowed him to easily point out the hypocrisy and toxic atmosphere in Hollywood. A great example is when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars. Unlike most people at the time, his anger wasn't solely directed at Will Smith. Obviously, he was clearly to blame, but that wasn't really the root of the issue. Instead, his anger was aimed at the sentiment and the atmosphere in Hollywood that made him think he could actually get away with this. In an interview shortly after the incident, he called Hollywood spineless and said that it was sickening that Will Smith had gotten a standing ovation afterwards. He was also quick to point out that if anyone else had walked from the audience and done that, they would have been escorted out by security or maybe even arrested. It wasn't the first time Jim Carrey was outspoken about Hollywood. In 2014, he had an appearance on the Jimmy Kimmel Show that left a lot of the audience scratching their heads.
All the comics and show business don't know what this is. Right? I'm sick and tired of the secrets and the lies. It is the secret symbol of the Illuminati, and you're a part of it. Talk show hosts, people on television, people in sitcoms have been hired by the government to throw you off the track, to distract you so you don't know what's really going on. They're trying to turn us into consumer drones of some sort.
It's a bizarre segment to say the least, and it's really hard to tell which parts are even a joke. And it doesn't seem like Kimmel has any idea either. When Jim comes into the studio and starts doing the hand signal, he looks around to the side as if he's looking for confirmation from the producers. But as silly as it starts, or maybe like some comments suggest it was highlighting something else, a lot of Jim Carrey's points seem to come from his actual beliefs, and it matches up with things he said in serious interviews later on in his career. Then later on in the interview, when he pretends he's being controlled by his iPhone, it's still an exaggeration of what's really happening in the world.
Yeah, listen, I'm in the middle of blowing the lid off some...
What happened?
I'm sorry, Jimmy. I was temporarily interrupted by my iPhone 6 Plus. I think what I was really trying to say was I think people will enjoy Dumb and Dumber this weekend.
And that is what I thought you were about to say.
They should all go to the theater tomorrow and see it. Because we could use a good laugh. Ha 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 ha.
He even ties his own role in the conspiracy he's playing into. turning the final punchline into an ad for the film he was starring in. The whole thing is really blurry, and you can't really tell which parts he's even joking about, if any. Jim Carrey probably knew that he couldn't say this stuff and have it aired if it wasn't partly a joke. Some people have speculated that the audience laughs were added in afterwards to make it seem more like a joke, but at certain points in the interview he pauses to let the laughs or applause die down, or repeats things that couldn't be heard over the noise. It makes it unlikely that all of this laughter was added in with the editing. If it was a joke though, Kimmel was the perfect stooge to make it work. His emptiness and his fake laughter is exactly the kind of thing that Jim Carrey would have wanted to avoid by checking out from Hollywood. These kinds of appearances would only become more common. Jim Carrey's personal life is most likely a large part of the reason why. Just a year after this interview, Jim lost his girlfriend at the time, and it's clear that it shook him to his core. What made it worse were the lawsuits that came after her passing. Members of her family looking to blame someone for their loss filed wrongful death suits against Jim Carrey, alleging that his connections and public profile contributed to her tragic end. No wrongdoing was ever found, and both the suits were dropped afterwards, but only after 2 years of waiting. There's no question that it's a shadow that hung over Jim Carrey, as it would to anyone who went through a thing like this. Since then, it's been clear that Jim Carrey found comfort outside of his Hollywood persona. It was the shock that almost led him to giving up on acting entirely.
Well, I'm retiring, but
no.
Yeah, probably.
Are you being serious or are you screwing with me?
I'm being fairly serious, yeah.
Really? Why?
It depends. It depends if, if the Angels bring some sort of a script that's written in gold ink that says to me that it's going to be really important for people to see. I might continue down the road, but I'm taking a break.
While he still appears in the odd film here and there, most of his passion lies in his own artwork and his political cartoons today. It did clearly change his outlook on Hollywood, as we saw in a red carpet interview around a year after his girlfriend's passing. Appearing at the New York Fashion Week, he called the whole thing completely meaningless and said that we're a field of energy dancing for itself.
I believe that peace lies beyond personality, beyond invention and disguise, beyond the red S that you wear on your chest that makes bullets bounce off. I believe that it's deeper than that. I believe we're a field of energy dancing for itself.
It's a funny interview watching the reporter getting taken out of her element and into reality while Jim Carrey says whatever he feels like saying. She has no idea how to respond to this. One of his last lines in the interview is possibly the most meaningful. After Jim lays down the spiritual smackdown, the interviewer questions him on if what celebrities say really matters at all, and his response is short and sweet.
Okay. So what's happening in our world right now? Because there is a lot of news that actually is relevant that's not that
Here's
uplifting.
the thing, it's not our world.
None of this is real?
Nope.
So you're just passing
We don't
through.
matter. We don't matter.
Oh, wow.
There's the good news.
Okay.
He knows, like the rest of Hollywood should, that their world has no real relation to what's really going on in people's lives. They're entertainment and a series of characters that are extremely rich. And now that he realizes this, he really can't take any of it seriously anymore. Jim Carrey, like everyone else, is a really complicated figure who can't be defined in any single way. It's clear though that his honesty off the screen and his ability to throw himself into whichever role he chooses have made him beloved by millions. And it will be a tragedy when we see him in cinemas for the last time, but after decades of making people laugh and knowing how truly disturbing Hollywood really is and how empty the actors inside of it are, he can luckily step away whenever he likes, knowing he potentially brought more laughter to the world than anyone else alive today.